Before Cole Mercer lay his inheritance, a patch of forgotten forest and a rotten treehouse no one believed was real. The letter from his late mentor still echoed in his mind. If Ember leads you here, it means hope still breathes. To the world, it was worthless land, a veteran's foolish dream. But as Cole stepped closer, his loyal dog Ember froze, ears lifted toward the towering oak. A soft hum pulsed from within the trunk, like the heartbeat of something alive. And in that moment, Cole realized this was no ruin. It was a doorway, a gift left by a man who believed that light itself could be grown. Support us by subscribing to the channel, and let's keep the light alive together. The morning fog of the Blue Ridge rolled like slow smoke across the valleys, softening every edge of the world. It was the kind of silence that made a man hear his own heartbeat, the silence that followed years of thunder. Cole Mercer stood at the edge of that quiet, the brim of his old cap wet with dew, his boots planted in mud that smelled of pine and memory. 7 years had passed since he'd left the desert behind, but war had a way of following a man home. It lived in the way he checked every shadow twice, in the way he measured each breath before taking it. Beside him padded Ember, his German shepherd, 7 years old, sable-furred, strong in the chest and wise in the eyes. She moved with the calm precision of an old soldier, tail low, ears turning like radar dishes to the smallest noise. Ember had saved him more than once overseas, alerting him to landmines, ambushes, ghosts of heat in the sand. These days, she saved him from quieter things, the heaviness of empty rooms, the echoes that rattled when night came too still. Cole lived alone in a rented cabin outside Asheville, a place half buried in vines and unpaid bills. He worked odd carpentry jobs when the joints in his hands allowed it, drank instant coffee, and pretended that peace was something a man could earn by standing still long enough. He had no family left but the dog and the ghost of a promise. That promise arrived one cold morning in March. The mailbox creaked like an old throat when he opened it. Inside lay a cream-colored envelope stamped Veterans Institute. He expected another notice, another meeting he'd never attend, but the handwriting stopped him. Neat, slanted, painfully familiar. Jonah Raines. Jonah had been his mentor during the rehabilitation program, a brilliant engineer with kind eyes and the distracted air of a man always hearing music no one else could. Years ago, Jonah had vanished from the world, quitting his post after a public dispute over ethics and funding. Some said he'd gone mad, others said he'd gone holy. Either way, he was gone. Inside the envelope, beneath a memorial notice for Jonah's passing, lay a scrap of hand-drawn paper, a map, rough lines tracing the Blue Ridge foothills, marked with a small symbol that looked like a tree inside a circle. Beneath it were 3 words written in faded ink: For C. Mercer. Cole turned the paper over. On the back, in the same thin script, "If you still listen to the quiet, you'll find what I left behind." He read it twice, then a third time. Ember watched him, with her head tilted, waiting for a command that didn't come. "Guess we're going hiking," he murmured. They set out the next morning beneath a sky the color of pewter. The truck coughed through the first miles of gravel road, then surrendered to the mud near an abandoned logging trail. Cole shouldered his pack, old army canvas, patched more times than he could count, and let Ember lead the way. The air smelled of rain and thawing earth. The forest floor was slick with last year's leaves. Every step stirred a whisper. By noon, they had climbed higher than he'd planned. The map was more suggestion than guide, but Ember seemed certain, nose to the ground, following some scent beyond reason. Twice she stopped, looked back, and waited until he caught up. Around them, the woods thickened into silence so dense it pressed against his ears. Then, near a clearing rimmed by mountain laurel, Ember froze. Her body tensed, tail stiff, a low sound rumbling in her throat, not warning, not fear, but recognition. Cole followed her gaze and saw it. An enormous white oak, its trunk wider than a pickup, its bark silvered with age. High among the branches sat a wooden structure, long abandoned. Boards warped, roof sagging under moss. A rope ladder hung in tatters like a forgotten prayer. He circled the base. The tree seemed to breathe. Roots knotted deep into the hillside. Beneath a curtain of vines, something metallic caught the light. He brushed away the leaves and uncovered a small steel plate half buried in soil. The letters were faint but clear. J.R. 2015. Jonah Rains, the year he disappeared. A shiver, not from cold, ran up Cole's spine. "What did you find, old girl?" he whispered. Ember sniffed the ground, then looked up at the house in the branches and gave a soft, impatient bark, as if urging him to climb. The ladder was too rotted to trust, so he found a foothold in the roots, easing himself upward until he reached the platform. Inside, the air was stale with dust and time. A cot sagged in one corner, a rusted lantern in another. The walls were carved with sketches, gears, roots, shapes of leaves overlapping with equations. It was less a dwelling than a thought half-finished. On the floor, a section of wood looked different, newer, as if replaced more recently than the rest. Cole knelt, tapped it. Hollow. He wedged his pocket knife into the seam, pried it open. Beneath lay a glimpse of metal again, but this time he didn't dig deeper, not yet. Whatever was down there deserved daylight, not the gray breath of a dying afternoon. He climbed down carefully. Ember waited, tail thumping once against the earth. The sky had darkened into bruised blue. Mist rose from the hollows. Cole folded the map, slid it into his jacket, and looked back one last time. The white oak stood silent, but somehow alive in a way no tree should be, its bark humming faintly, or maybe it was just the wind. "Tomorrow," he said to Ember. "We come back tomorrow." They hiked down in near darkness. Behind them, high in the branches, a faint light flickered once, like a single heartbeat, and vanished. That night, in the cabin, Cole couldn't sleep. He sat by the small wood stove, the letter open on the table, reading Jonah's words again. "If you still listen to the quiet." Jonah had always spoken of silence as a kind of language. In the army workshops he used to tell them, "Noise is what the world makes. Silence is what it means." Back then, Cole had thought it poetic nonsense. Now, years later, it sounded like instruction. He studied the map under lamplight. The coordinates, the markings, they weren't random. He traced the contour lines with a carpenter's pencil, and there it was, a faint alignment, almost like a circuit. At its center, the tree symbol formed the note of connection. Jonah's handwriting beside it, Elysium. Cole whispered the word aloud, testing it. It tasted like hope half buried under years of dust. Ember stirred by the fire, ears twitching in her sleep. He looked at her, the dog that had followed him through explosions, through loss, through everything, and felt the first small spark of something he hadn't allowed himself in years. Curiosity. Maybe even faith. He poured a measure of cheap whiskey into a tin cup and raised it toward the window where the ridge lay hidden in fog. "To you, Jonah," he murmured, and to whatever madness you left up there. The wind outside shifted. Somewhere deep in the forest, a single owl called, 3 long notes that echoed against the hills like a message answering back. Cole set the cup down, pulled his jacket tighter, and stared at the map until sleep claimed him. In his dreams he saw light, golden and breathing, flowing through the wood and water, and a voice, Jonah's voice, whispering, "Listen to what grows, not what speaks." When dawn came, the fog lifted slow and blue, the sound that promises nothing yet forgives everything. Cole loaded his pack again. Ember waited at the door, tail still, eyes bright. The world felt lighter, as if something had already decided he was part of its plan. They started back toward the ridge. Neither of them noticed. As the truck turned onto the old mountain road that far away on the hill, the white oak shimmered once more, a pulse beneath its bark, like a heart remembering the sound of its own name. Rain came thin and steady, a silver thread stitching the morning to the mountain as Cole Mercer parked below the ridge and shouldered his canvas pack. Ember dropped from the truck with the soft thud of practiced paws, shook the damp from her sable coat, and fell into step at his knee. The forest smelled of iron and leaf rot and some cleaner note, cedar, maybe, that made him think of workbenches and quiet rooms where good hands make careful things. They climbed without hurry. The path remembered them, or maybe Ember remembered for them. She took the same angles around the same slick stones and paused at the same break in laurel, where the slope opened to the white oak standing like a cathedral pillar in a church of fog. The treehouse looked lonelier by daylight, its planks bowing under moss, its rope ladder surrendering in frayed strands. Beneath that, the ground held the secret Ember had found, a scab of steel against the dark earth. Cole knelt, scraped away last night's thin skin of rain, and worked his fingers under the edge. The plate lifted with a sticky sigh, roots clinging like old stitches. Beneath lay a cylinder of brushed steel the length of his forearm, capped in black resin, edges clean, craftsmanship quiet. No rust, no panic in its design. It was the confidence of a man who expected his message to arrive exactly when it should. He sat back on his heels, rain ticking on his cap brim, and turned the cylinder in his hands. Ember lowered her head until her nose touched the metal, then gave a small, satisfied huff as if to say, "This is the thing." He pried the cap gently with the flat of his knife. The seal let go with a soft hiss. Cedar, yes, and paper. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay a letter and a key. The letter was thick stock, the ink a neat slant he knew, Jonah's. The key was stranger, a spiral length of dark wood fused seamlessly with gray stone, the join so perfect it looked grown, not made. It felt warm, impossibly, like a living wrist. Along the grain, he saw tiny incisions and grooves, geometry written in another alphabet. At the base, a small engraving, J.R., Elysium. He set the key on his thigh, hands steady now, and unfolded the letter. "Cole," it began, "if this has reached you, then I am where the questions stop. Forgive the method. To build anything true, you must pour a piece of yourself into it. Sometimes that piece is time you will not get back. The thing we built needed a keeper who understands weight, silence, and the mercy of small, consistent work. When I found you in that workshop years ago, with your hands shaken and your jaw clenched against the noise, I recognized the only credential that matters, a man who will carry a load no one can see. I left the Institute when the numbers won and the people lost. I bought this land under a name that isn't mine and wove the project under the canopy because power looks up and never down. If you're standing where I hope, then Ember still listens to the frequencies we trained into her. I use them as breadcrumbs, tones the ear ignores but a dog will hear forever. The door will answer to your touch for a reason. When you bled in that desert, I used an old bio kit to patch you, salvaged skin, a little DNA. Forgive the theft. I put your code into the lock. You're the first and last credential. Elysium is not an invention. It is a treaty. Between need and enough. Between the hunger of cities and the patience of soil. If you choose to open the door, do it for the ones who do not get invited to rooms with microphones. Trust the dog. Trust the design. Jonah Cole. Let the page sag in his hands until the words stilled. Rain pattered on the back of the letter, darkening the fibers. A bird called once and then thought better of it. Ember pressed her shoulder to his knee, anchoring him to the present tense. He imagined Jonah at a table lit by a single lamp, writing these lines with the care of a man repairing a watch that belonged to someone he loved. He thought of a desert ambulance, of the blur of heat and morphine and Jonah's steady voice saying, "Stay here with me," and of the moment a stranger decides to make you his responsibility. Somewhere between gratitude and grief, the knot behind Cole's ribs loosened. He slid the letter back into the oilcloth and rose. The tree was not waiting. It was simply there, immense and indifferent, but something in the soil felt like listening. He circled the trunk until he found it. The patch of bark a shade smoother, a breath cooler. He brushed moss away and saw the seam, a circle barely wider than his palm, grain interrupted in a ring so perfect it could have been a growth band if not for the faint dullness of a hidden mechanism beneath. He lifted the key. Close up, the spiral resolved into a double helix, stone wrap in wood and a patient braid. He turned it in his fingers, found the alignment notch, a whisper of asymmetry, and pressed the key into the seam. For a heartbeat, nothing. Then a vibration as gentle as the beginning of thunder hummed into his fingertips, ran up his arm, and settled at the base of his neck. From inside the trunk, chimes answered. 3 notes, distant and pure, as if glass sang in a deep room. The circle of bark rotated a quarter turn and drew inward. Breath moved. Cool, dry, cedar-clean air exhaling from a space where no air should be. Ember stepped in tight beside him, ears forward but soft. The opening widened, not on rusty hinges, but on the cooperation of materials that had learned each other's language. Wood sliding past stone, past something that reflected light like polished shell. The amber glow rose gradually, as if the tree were waking without alarm. A spiral stair fell away, a helix of the same fused wood stone as the key, each tread broad enough for steady descent, the inner rail grown from the trunk itself. The light didn't flicker. It breathed. Cole stood with one hand on the jam that wasn't a jam, the rain at his back, a new weather below. He swallowed once, felt the click of decision, and started down. The first 10 steps were the longest of his life, measured in a mathematics that had nothing to do with feet. The air warmed as he descended, and the smell turned from forest floor to resin and clean metal, like a workshop that is also a chapel. Amber veins ran within the wood walls, their light pulsing in slow tides that seemed to align with something in his chest. He thought of machines that keep time and bodies that forget it, and wondered what Jonah had calibrated this place to remember. At a landing, the stair opened into a small circular vestibule no wider than a modest kitchen. The floor was stone poured smooth. The walls, living wood. In the center stood a pedestal grown rather than placed, a thick column rising waist-high, its top cupping a glass sphere the size of a melon. Within the sphere, not liquid, not air, but suspended motes of gold dust turning on invisible currents like a galaxy thinking. As Cole stepped closer, the dust stirred and gathered, not into shapes but into intention. The motes aligned until letters appeared, precise and bright. "Welcome, Cole." Ember's claws clicked once on the stone as she stopped beside him. She lifted her head and exhaled through her nose, that quiet dog sound she makes when something is both new and acceptable. "Me too," Cole said under his breath, and was startled to find his voice working. He didn't touch the sphere. He didn't need to. The pedestal hummed faintly under its skin. Panels he would have sworn were solid wood softened, like bark learning to open. Within the curved wall opposite the stair, a lattice unfurled, revealing a recess containing a narrow shelf. On it lay a cloth-bound booklet, old but not brittle, its cover stamped with a simple mark. A circle with a tree inside, the same sigil that had lived on Jonah's map. He lifted the booklet. Inside were a dozen pages, notes in Jonah's hand, but these were not the rushed scrawl of a man running out of hours. They were calm, diagrammed, annotated with the patience of a teacher. Titles, simple and unafraid. Root Purification, Stage 1. Photonic Capture, Stage 2. Habitat, Stage 3. Each section a sketch of concept, not a ceremony of jargon. Membranes that mimic capillaries, leaves that harvest, not hoard, walls that flex with seasons and resist with kindness. At the end, one page alone. Protocol, authorization. A single line beneath, biometric handshake confirmed. Mercer, C. Cole closed the booklet and touched the cover with his thumb, the way a man might touch the name on a headstone he both hates and loves. He looked at Ember. "He made me part of the lock," he said. Ember canted an ear and sat, the way she had sat next to him through 5 unkind winters, as if to say, "Then, and open what needs opening." The sphere's letters dissipated slowly, scattered to their drift, then reformed with new instruction: tread downward. He almost laughed. The voice in his head made Jonah's words sound wry. Past the vestibule, another set of stairs curled deeper, a tighter helix, the light within the veins brightening by half a breath. He descended 10 more steps and found a door at the next landing. Not a slab or a hatch, but a plane of dense material grown smoother than bark, mottled with swirls of amber that looked like sap caught in time. At its center, a small depression shaped roughly like a human palm. He laid his hand against it. Warmth answered. Not heat, not electricity, but the sensation of being recognized. Somewhere inside the wall, something counted. The door softened and slid aside. Beyond it stretched the edge of a larger space, but the light held itself at the threshold, refusing to flood the unknown. He took one step, then another, into a circular balcony that overlooked dark volume. As his foot reached the second mark etched faintly into the floor, the chamber woke. Not all at once, but in rings, like the tree itself thinking outward. Lines of amber rose along ribs of living wood. The darkness below resolved into spiraling levels, rails, consoles that were also roots, conduits braided like vines. A sound like wind through an organ of leaves rose and fell, low and kind. Far above, a thin rill of daylight slid through a seam in the trunk and fractured into honey. Cole stood very still, a man who has found the inside of a horizon. "Jonah," he whispered, and the name did not echo. It settled. He did not explore further, not yet. The soldier in him took stock. One door behind, one stair below, one dog beside whose nose has never lied. The man in him, what was left after the sand had blown through him, understood the mercy of stopping before wonder becomes noise. He took one long breath, tasted cedar and rain and a future that did not require applause, and backed away until his heels met the last stair up. They returned to the vestibule. The sphere's dust traced a final brief message. Tomorrow. He could have sworn, for a ridiculous second, that the tree was teasing him. He smiled into the empty room like a man remembering he has a face. Up through the first stair, out through the circle in the bark, back into rain as gentle as breath. The door closed with the silence of permission, not secrecy, and the seam vanished into grain. Cole pressed his palm flat against the trunk. It was only a tree. It was not only a tree. On the walk down, Ember kept brushing his leg as if touching home base. The mud took their prints and held them like signatures. At the truck, Cole slid the key into the inner pocket of his jacket, near his heart, as if geography mattered. He tucked Jonah's letter into the map into the glove box into a life that had just agreed to be larger. Halfway down the road, he pulled to the shoulder and killed the engine, letting the rain tick on the roof. He looked back at the ridge, now a gray shoulder under a quilted cloud. Something loosened behind his sternum and did not hurt when it did. He put his hand on Ember's head. "We'll go back at first light," he said. Ember thumped her tail against the seat, an amen with fur. Somewhere up there, inside a piece of the oldest living patience on the mountain, a small system hummed and recorded a heartbeat it had been waiting years to meet. Somewhere in that recording, between the notes of welcome and the whispered math of veins, the project remembered its keeper's name and wrote, "Present." Cole turned the key, and the truck answered with a cough and consent. The road unspooled ahead. Behind them, not visible but certain, a door inside a living thing held its breath and kept its promise. Morning returned in shards of amber light, dripping through the mist like honey spilled from the sky. Cole parked the truck by the stream and watched the fog thin around the ridge. Ember jumped down, her paws sinking softly into wet moss. The mountain was quiet except for the pulse of water over stone and the slow rhythm of wind moving through the white oak above them. He felt the key's weight inside his jacket, warm even through the cloth, as if carrying its own small sun. He touched it once before he started climbing. Every step creaked in his knees, but the ache grounded him. Pain was proof that something still worked. The door in the bark waited exactly as he had left it, seamless, silent, as though the forest had already forgiven his trespass. He pressed his palm where the ring had opened the day before. The grain recognized him. The seam softened. A sigh passed through the trunk. Then the spiral of amber light breathed outward, and the door folded back into itself. They stepped inside. The air was warmer here, earthy, alive, faintly metallic. The walls glowed with threads of saplight, slow as heartbeat. He descended the helix stair again, Ember's nails ticking beside him. At the bottom, the small vestibule awaited with its glass sphere still pulsing softly, though the words that had greeted him yesterday were gone. He took a breath, tasting cedar and time. "All right, Jonah," he said quietly. "Show me." The sphere brightened. motes swirling into new letters. Proceed downward. He did. The deeper stair curved around the trunk's hollow heart, smooth under his boots. The glow within the walls grew more complex, no longer simple veins of light but networks, arteries of amber and gold weaving through darker wood. The air grew moister, almost electric, like air before thunder. The stair ended at a platform. Cole lifted his flashlight but found he didn't need it. The place made its own day. The chamber opened in 3 tiers. A living cylinder carved inside the oak, taller than any house had a right to be. The walls were ribbed like lungs, each rib faintly translucent, light and shadow breathing together. Water trickled somewhere unseen. He heard a hum, not mechanical but organic, the kind of vibration that lives inside living things. He stepped forward, and the light responded, gentle, golden, unfolding like dawn. The first level was simple, a shallow pool where clear water collected from root-like tubes. Tiny silver threads ran through it, catching light as they moved. A wooden plaque, if one could call it that, had grown out of the wall itself, its surface etched with the same handwriting as Jonah's letters. Stage 1. Root Purification. Cole knelt. The water was impossibly clear. He cupped it, brought it to his lips. It tasted of rain and nothing else, clean in a way he'd forgotten existed. Ember lapped from the edge, tail wagging once in quiet approval. He followed a ramp of curved wood to the second tier, where the air warmed slightly and the glow sharpened. Above him stretched hundreds of delicate structures, thin, leaf-like panels, soft green gold, trembling as if catching wind no one could feel. The panels moved subtly, turning toward the narrow shafts of daylight filtering through the upper cracks of the trunk. Jonah's note was carved nearby, Stage 2, Photonic Capture. He understood now these leaves were no decoration. They were collectors, like living solar cells, drawing light into the heart of the system. Beneath their shimmer ran channels of metal finer than veins. The whole thing breathed energy the way a forest breathes oxygen. Cole touched one of the leaves. It flexed under his fingertip, warm, almost skin-like. He stepped back instinctively. Ember sniffed it, gave a small grunt, then sneezed, unimpressed. Cole laughed quietly, the sound strange against so much wonder. He climbed to the third tier, a balcony circling the hollow space. Here, models rested on the smooth shelves grown from the walls. Miniature houses shaped like seeds opening, towers woven from root and stone. Beside them lay Jonah's notebooks, each sealed under transparent resin. Inside the covers he could see sketches, houses breathing air through bark, lights glowing from fungal caps, tunnels veined with mycelium veins. It wasn't science fiction. It was something older, an agreement between design and decay. A quote etched in Jonah's handwriting curved across the wall. If a house is alive, it never abandons its maker. Cole ran his fingers over the letters. For the first time in years, he felt small in a way that wasn't humiliating. Ember wandered to the railing and stared down. From this height, the levels below glowed like a living heart. Water, light, and root all connected by invisible rhythm. The dog's ears twitched, her eyes reflecting gold. Cole leaned beside her. He really did it, girl. He made the world breathe again. Her tail swept once against his leg. Across the chamber, a faint sound stirred, a chime, soft and deliberate. The glass sphere in the vestibule must have followed him down. Its voice now echoed faintly through the walls. 3 tones, repeating like a heartbeat learning speech. The light shifted slightly bluer, then steadied. Cole noticed something new near the far curve of the third level, a wall section pulsing slower than the rest. He approached, laid a hand against it. The texture changed under his palm, and the light gathered there, forming an outline, a human silhouette, open-armed. Words surfaced. Elysium activation lock, Mercer, C, authorized. He drew his hand back, startled. "Jonah, what the hell did you put in here?" Ember barked softly, one short warning. Cole smiled faintly. "Yeah, one step at a time." He took a breath, pressed his palm again. The wall opened, not a door, an unfolding. Bark and metal peeled apart soundlessly, revealing a narrow alcove, lined with moss-like circuitry. At its center hung a suspended object the size of a heart, dark and pulsing with faint light. Beneath it, a panel of smooth wood bore an inscription, Elysium Core, Living Circuit. He could almost hear Jonah's voice, calm, thoughtful, always explaining even when no one asked. The core is neither machine nor tree. It's both. It learns balance from whatever touches it. Cole withdrew his hand, unwilling to wake it further. He wasn't ready. He sat on the floor, back to the warm wood, and let the sound of the place move through him. Water, light, the slow breath of creation. Ember lay across his boots, her head on her paws, sighing once, content. For a long time, neither of them moved. Cole thought about Jonah, how the man had vanished, leaving behind not ruin but renewal. How he'd trusted someone like Cole, a man patched together by survival, with something so pure it refused ownership. He looked around at the room, at the light curving through wood that had learned to glow. He felt like he was standing inside the body of forgiveness. "I get it now," he said softly. "You built a place that can't be sold." The walls answered in their slow rhythm, sap, light moving like a nod. He rose, brushed sawdust and awe from his jacket. "Come on, girl, let's leave it breathing." They ascended the spiral again, retracing the helix until they reached the outer door. When the sunlight met them, it felt different, thicker somehow, alive with the same pulse that had followed him upward. The forest seemed aware now, listening. Cole looked back once. The seam of the door sealed seamlessly, bark weaving over light until no trace remained. He wondered if any satellite could even find this place, or if Jonah's design hid it in wavelengths only kindness could see. At the truck, Cole removed the map from his pocket and spread it across the hood. The tree symbol sat in the center, and he drew a small circle around it, then another and another, ripples spreading out. Each circle represented something he couldn't yet name. Ember jumped into the passenger seat, waiting. Cole started the engine, then stopped. The key in his pocket hummed faintly against his ribs, and in the distance, deep within the mountain, the white oak exhaled a single soft gust, like a sleeping creature turning over in its dreams. He smiled. "Yeah," he murmured, "we'll come back." The truck rolled down the trail, its tires crushing wet leaves. Behind them, the forest swallowed their tracks, and so somewhere high among the branches, light flowed quietly through living circuits, waiting for its next question. Frost rhymed the meadow like breath held too long, and the Blue Ridge wore a thin silver the morning Cole Mercer drove into town for feed and nails. The week had gone by in quiet circuits. Hike, study, descend, learn the slow grammar of water and light, then retreat before wonder turned greedy. He slept better now, not because the nightmares stopped, but because the mountain had given him a rhythm older than fear. Ember rode shotgun with her chin on the window ledge, fogging the glass with patient clouds. The radio was off. Silence did the talking. Havenbrook, the small town folded into the foothills above Asheville, kept its rituals as if time were a neighbor. Men in flannel posted up outside the diner with coffee like tar, a hardware store that smelled of oil and oak, a church sign that changed verses and weather reports with equal gravity. Cole parked under a sugar maple and stepped out into air so clear it rang. He felt the key's weight against his chest and told himself he was only here for screws and a coil of wire. He told himself a lot of things, most of them true enough to live on. Inside the diner, the bell over the door gave its tired note. The room was all chrome and pancakes and the kind of laughter that binds a place together. Cole took the same end stool, ordered black coffee, and watched the window. From here, he could see the ridge if he wanted, but he didn't look. He looked at the reflection of it in the steel napkin holder instead, the safer, smaller version. Ember waited outside by the truck, lying sphinx still, eyes half closed, ears never. He was stirring sugar he didn't need when a shadow fell over the counter and a voice practiced its brightness. "Mr. Mercer, Ethan Caldwell." The man was easy to read even if you'd never read a man. Early 40s, tall, hair the color of polished chestnut combed back with the confidence of someone who trusts mirrors, camel coat, slacks that had never met gravel, shoes that squeaked the first week and then learned to whisper. His jaw was soft, but his smile had edges. A gold wedding band flashed. The skin under it was pale, as if it came on and off depending on the room. He extended a card before Cole had agreed to catch it. Ethan Caldwell. Land acquisition sat above a phone number that sounded expensive. "Saw your truck," he said. "Figured I'd introduce myself. I help folks transition property, rural parcels, timber, that kind of thing. You know how it is. Old boundaries, new opportunities." Cole sipped. The coffee was a little burnt. He didn't mind. "Do I? Word is you hold a piece up there the county forgot to love," Ethan continued, leaning in like a man confiding in a friend he'd just minted. "A few buyers are sniffing around. Timing's good. I could make you very comfortable for a patch of trees no one's using." "A patch of trees," Cole said. He let the words sit between them. Outside, Ember lifted her head and watched two teenagers cross the lot, then some set it back down. Ethan followed Cole's gaze to the window, clocked the dog, recalibrated. "Now, I respect privacy," he said, which is what men say just before they step past it. "But folks are talking. Lights on the ridge, odd hours, a dabble in tech investment. Could be a relay, could be nothing. Either way, liability is a bear when you're alone." Cole turned his cup slowly until the handle pointed north, the old habit of orienting the smallest thing. "You don't have enough money," he said mildly. Ethan laughed to show how game he was. "Everything has a price." "Not everything," Cole said, and in his voice there was a knotted rope of courtesy and the end of it. Ethan's smile thinned. He set the card down anyway, as if certain that paper could grow roots in any soil. "Markets move quick," he said. "Call before they do." He left on a breeze of aftershave and expectation. Cole didn't touch the card. He didn't have to. The waitress slid it into the trash as if excusing a fly, then topped off his coffee with a look that said, "People keep being people, don't they?" He nodded his thanks, finished the cup, paid cash, and walked back into the weather like a man who had already chosen his sky. On the drive out of town, he noticed them. A black SUV idle across from the gas station, windows so dark they collected the day and kept it. A second one parked crooked behind the feed store, antenna small and sure. Not law, not locals. Ember's ears pricked. He didn't speed up. He didn't slow down. He let the mountain swallow him the way it always had. One curve, one breath, one choice at a time. By late afternoon, the fog had climbed back up the hollows and laid its hands on the ridge. Cole checked the cabin's perimeters the way a man checks the locks on an old grief. A walk around, a listen, a stillness. Ember traced the yard's edge like a slow comet, sent an information the air hadn't decided to declare. Inside, Cole set the hardware on the bench and reached for the old shortwave radio he kept around for storms and nostalgia. He hadn't used it in months. He hadn't tuned it on purpose now. But when he brushed the dust from its face, the speaker clicked alive without being asked, and a woman's voice, low, even, lacquered in corporate calm, threaded into the room like a needle. "Good afternoon, Mr. Mercer." He froze. The voice continued, patient with its own trespass. "This is Evelyn Reed, Executive Director at Helix Dine Solutions out of Charlotte. Apologies for the unconventional hello. We picked up a legacy frequency in your quadrant this week. Old R&D bandwidth. Curious thing." The word legacy landed with the weight of a gravestone and a birth certificate. Cole glanced at Ember. She was already on her feet facing the window, the ridge reflected in her eyes. He turned the dial 2 notches. Static parted like a curtain. The voice didn't falter. "We worked with a Dr. Jonah Raines some years back," Evelyn went on. "Brilliant man, difficult. The signal your ridge is singing featured in some of his early prototypes. When patterns repeat, we listen." Cole felt the mountain under the floorboards, the trees' gravity tugging on his bones even here. He set the radio down and stood, shoulders square without meaning to. "You called for a reason," he said. "We're in the business of stewardship," Evelyn said, and managed to pronounce the word without irony. "There are safety questions when unlicensed systems operate where the public can wander. There are also opportunities. We could help you field the first and reward you handsomely for the second." She left the number on the word handsomely. Cole thought of overdue notices folded into drawers, of a truck that slept with a cough, of a dog who ate before he did. He thought of water turning clear in a wooden bowl, and light traveling through veins and a dead man's handwriting that did not tremble except on the last line. "How handsomely?" he asked, because a man has to measure things even when he won't buy them. "8 figures," she said, like a weather report. "Possibly more, depending on exclusivity." Ember's growl was so low it felt like a second pulse under his own. Cole looked at her and found his answer already standing on 4 feet. He turned back to the radio. "I don't sell another man's light," he said, and was surprised by how steady his voice sounded, as if the room itself had agreed. A pause. The scrape of a page being turned in some far office. "Mr. Mercer," Evelyn said, same calm, more steel. "We respect grief. We also respect reality. Intellectual property is messy. Prior art can be established. Safety violations can be alleged. I'd hate for something noble to drown in paperwork. Joint custody prevents unfortunate headlines. I've carried worse than headlines," he said. "I'm sure," she answered, and the pity in the word was a weapon. "Our cars will remain on the public roads for now. We will continue to observe. If you reconsider, my direct line will be the first number that reaches you no matter which device you pick up. Good evening." The radio clicked to a hush that had edges. Cole switched it off and pulled the plug because habits cannot be too careful. Outside, the fog thickened, and the ridge wore it like a shawl. Ember pressed her shoulder to his leg, warm as a vow. He placed a hand to her withers without looking away from the window. In the reflection, he could see the shape of himself he used to recognize, and the one this mountain had started to teach him. In the drawer of the workbench lay a stack of envelopes with red stamps and the polite threat of due dates. In the inner pocket of his jacket lay a key the color of earth and bone. He felt the old arithmetic rise, weight on one side, weight on the other, and watched it balance in a way that had nothing to do with numbers. He ate standing up, 2 eggs, a heel of bread, coffee that had learned too much heat. Ember ate sitting, as she always did, the small dignity of a creature who knows ceremony is just reverence in smaller clothes. After, he stepped out into the yard and listened. The forest at dusk sounds like a choir clearing its throat. Tonight it sounded like a room waiting for someone to say, "We begin." The ridge exhaled. Somewhere far up the slope, a single point of amber winked and went still again. Not a flare, not an accident, a pulse. He answered without words, by shouldering his pack and checking his headlamp and tying his laces tight. Ember spun once, brief and glad. They climbed the first half-mile as night braided itself through the trees. He didn't go to the door. He didn't need to. The tree didn't ask for performance. Cole stood at the base and placed his palm against bark that had learned his name. He kept it there until the cold in his hand met the warmth inside the wood and canceled. "We'll keep you safe," he said. It wasn't a promise. It was inventory. It was a statement of what already occupied the shelves. The wind lifted, and the white oak's crown shivered like 1,000 quiet agreements. When he lowered his hand, the light inside the grain followed it for an inch, the way fireflies follow laughter, then faded. He turned back down the trail with the clean sting of pine in his lungs and the feeling that a line had been crossed without breaking. Town to mountain, rumor to resolve, offer to oath. By the time they reached the cabin, the black SUVs were gone or invisible, which is not the same thing. The radio was still unplugged. The world had found them. That could not be undone. Cole set the key on the table, turned it once with his thumb, and watched it catch the lamplight like a river stone caught mid-current. "They'll come again," he said. Ember thumped her tail once against the floor. Outside, a fox barked twice and moved on. The night arranged itself into pieces a man could sleep inside. Cole lay down with the taste of cedar still in his mouth and the certainty of something new. That the next time a stranger tried to price the unpriceable, he would have more than refusal to answer with. He would have a language made of water and light, and the way a dog's ears mark what the air is hiding. And when sleep finally took him, he dreamed not of war, but of a town square full of faces upturned to a glow they could not explain and did not need to own. Dawn slid down the blue ridge like spilled gold, dripping through the fog and pooling in the quiet valley below. Cole Mercer had never seen light move like that. Slow, deliberate, as if the sun were remembering how to begin again. For days after Evelyn Reed's call, the air around the cabin felt charged, listening. The hum beneath the soil was restless. Ember sensed it first, ears pricked, gaze fixed on the ridge where the white oak rose like a cathedral against the pale sky. Cole tried to busy himself with repairs, new railing on the porch, patches in the old roof, but every hammer strike echoed too loud, too hollow. The mountain wanted something of him, and he was running out of reasons to pretend otherwise. That morning, He made coffee, black and bitter, and unfolded a newspaper from town. The front page carried a photo of a faint amber glow above the ridge, captioned, "Locals report strange lights, possible forestry research." Underneath, a quote from Ethan Caldwell read, "No danger to the public, likely some old military tech, but we'll keep monitoring." Cole smiled without humor. Helix Din was moving their pieces already, dressing lies in local accents. He set the cup down and turned to Ember, who sat by the door, tail sweeping the floor in slow rhythm. "If they want to see light," he said quietly, "we'll show them what it really is." The dog tilted her head, the faint scar along her muzzle catching a beam of sunlight, like a seam of gold through stone. That day, Cole wrote a dozen emails, short and precise. He contacted the Asheville Chronicle, a local paper known for its environmental stories, the University of North Carolina's Renewable Energy Lab, whose director, Dr. Laura Price, had once served alongside Jonah in a volunteer project, and the County Safety Board. He invited them all to see a clean energy prototype built on Blue Ridge soil. No secrecy, no shadow deals, just daylight. When Dr. Price replied within hours, her message was curious but kind. If it truly uses natural symbiosis for energy conversion, it's worth examining. Jonah spoke of such things before he disappeared. "I'll bring a small team." Cole reread her words 3 times before whispering, "He didn't disappear, Laura. He just came home first." By Saturday, the clearing buzzed with more life than it had in years. Trucks, tripods, reporters scribbling, the metallic breath of generators humming against the calm of the woods. Cole stood beside the oak, his Carhartt jacket dusted with sawdust, face lined from years of weather and war but steady. Ember lay near his boots, watching every motion, her body the perfect blend of patience and vigilance. Dr. Laura Price stepped forward, a woman in her early 50s, tall, angular, her silver hair tied in a loose braid that gave her an air of quiet command. Her eyes, pale blue and sharp, moved with the precision of someone used to both microscopes and politics. "You were Jonah's student," she said, offering her hand. Her palm was cold, but her smile was real. "I was," Cole said. "He taught me how to repair field transmitters under enemy fire. Said everything has a way of talking, even machines, if you learn to listen." Laura nodded. "That sounds like him." She turned to the structure and caught her breath. "And this is what he was building?" "It's what he was dreaming," Cole corrected. He led them through the entrance Jonah's key had revealed, descending the spiral staircase of living wood and polished metal. Gasps followed. The journalists' cameras clicked like cicadas in heat. On the first level, clear water flowed through transparent roots, pooling into a basin before cycling back into the ground. "This," Cole said, "filters and purifies water using microbial fibers in the tree's vascular system. No chemicals, just life returning itself to balance." Laura crouched beside the basin, dipping a hand. "It's clean," she murmured. "Completely mineral neutral. Jonah actually did it." Upstairs, the second level shimmered with light. The translucent leaves embedded in the canopy pulsed softly as they absorbed sunlight and converted it into power. "These panels mimic photosynthesis," Cole explained. "No silicon, no waste. Each one grows from a base of biopolymer Jonah developed using cellulose nanofibers. When it's old, it biodegrades into soil." The journalists wrote furiously. One whispered, "It's alive. He made the house alive. When they reached the third level, Cole paused before a wall lined with holographic blueprints. This, he said, was Jonah's final plan: modular homes that breathe, built from the same organic circuits. They generate their own power, grow their own food, recycle everything. Houses that don't fight the earth. Laura turned toward him, voice low with awe. He wanted to end dependency. That's why Helix Den called it dangerous. Cole smiled faintly. They call anything dangerous that can't be owned. Down below, Ember rested quietly, but her tail tapped twice against the floor. The dog's way of saying she knew the truth, too. As they stepped outside, the light shifted, afternoon breaking open into a pale gold storm of leaves. The reporters gathered close, microphones blinking. One young journalist, freckles dusted across her nose, asked, "Mr. Mercer, what does this technology mean to you? You could sell it for millions." Cole looked past the crowd at the blue line of the horizon. "Jonah used to say light is just a promise waiting to be kept," he said. "I think it means we keep it, together." The woman smiled, her pen pausing mid-air. "And your dog?" she asked. "She seems to know more than all of us." Cole glanced down at Ember. "She knows loyalty," he said softly, "and loyalty's rarer than light." The next morning, the Asheville Chronicle ran the story. Veteran and his dog guard a living tree of light, a vision for humanity. Photos showed Ember lying beside her master under the canopy of gold-lit leaves, eyes half closed, as if guarding not technology but peace itself. The internet did what it always does: shared, reshaped, retold. Within 48 hours, millions watched the footage, hearts catching on one image: a scarred man and his aging German shepherd standing beside a glowing oak that breathed. But not everyone was moved to wonder. At Helix Den headquarters in Charlotte, Evelyn Reed watched the broadcast in silence. The glass-walled office reflected her face a dozen times, all perfectly composed. "He wants a stage," she murmured to her assistant, a young analyst in a black suit who looked perpetually terrified to blink. "Then we'll give him one." She turned to the window overlooking the city, steel veins glinting beneath the evening. "Prepare a statement. Question his credentials. Bring up PTSD isolation. Discredit the myth before it becomes gospel." Her voice was calm, but her eyes, the color of wet slate, held something colder. She pressed a button on her desk, connecting to a private line. "Activate PR Tier 2. I want Caldwell back in the field. If he won't sell, he'll drown in attention." Back in Blue Ridge, Cole was repairing a solar node when Ember began to growl. The sound wasn't fear, it was warning. She'd felt the shift in the world again. He looked toward town. The wind carried something sharp, like the edge of a headline before it's written. For the first time in years, Cole smiled not out of comfort, but readiness. "They're coming, girl," he said, wiping his hands on his jeans. "But this time, we've got the light." Ember wagged her tail once, slow and certain. Somewhere far below the ridge, engines stirred. Press, corporate cars, maybe worse. The forest exhaled, steady and ancient, as if the mountain itself had decided whose side it was on. And when the first flashbulb popped through the trees that night, the oak answered, not with fear, but with a pulse of light so soft and steady it looked like the earth was breathing. Morning came with the hush before a storm. The air above Blue Ridge carried a strange weight, as if invisible threads were being strung between the trees. Ember felt it first, ears twitching toward the unseen, her growl low and thoughtful. Cole stood on the porch, coffee steaming in his hand, watching mist rise from the valley. It looked peaceful, but peace, he'd learned, was often the mask war before it began. By now, the story of the Tree of Light had circled the country. News vans prowled the lower trails and journalists quoted his words about loyalty and light. But with fame came the dark gravity of attention. He'd started noticing small flashes in the canopy at night, tiny, rhythmic, knot of fireflies, drones, silent eyes tracing the forest. Helixton had returned, this time without pretense. That afternoon, while Cole repaired a copper conduit in the research chamber, Ember barked, a sharp, guttural sound that meant intrusion. He hurried up the spiral stairs and saw it through the canopy glass, a metallic glint darting among the branches, followed by two others. He recognized their make, civilian drones, but modified for reconnaissance. A net of surveillance had been cast over the mountain. He descended calmly, heart beating with the soldier's old precision. "All right, girl," he murmured, stroking Ember's head. "Let's see if Jonah left us a little thunder." On the lowest level, beneath the living roots, stood a narrow console sealed in brass. Jonah's notes had called it the Veil, a failsafe designed for when secrecy was the last defense. Cole removed the panel, revealing an interface etched into the metal like veins in a leaf. He pressed his palm against it. The console hummed alive, drawing power from the tree itself. "Signal scramble initiated," a faint digital voice murmured through the roots. Outside, the air shimmered faintly. Above the canopy, the first drone flickered, wobbled, and fell, its sensors blinded by a pulse Jonah had coded years ago. Then another fell, and another. Within minutes, silence reclaimed the forest. Ember barked once, triumphant, her tail sweeping the dust. Cole smiled for the first time that week, but the victory was short-lived. By dawn, a black van rolled up the dirt road to his cabin. 5 men in blue-gray uniforms stepped out, crisp and anonymous. Their leader, a man in his 50s with a silver crew cut and a clipped posture, approached. His badge gleamed, Federal Energy Safety Bureau. The name on it read Agent Briggs. Briggs was a man built for order, broad-shouldered, angular, with a face like a shut door. His eyes were gray, unreadable. He removed his sunglasses and said in a voice polished by authority, "Mr. Mercer, we have an inspection order regarding an unregistered experimental energy source operating on federal land." Cole didn't flinch. "You'll need a warrant." Briggs smiled without warmth. "We have one, courtesy of Helix Din. Solutions, who've raised public safety concerns, will need full access to the facility." Behind him, Ember's low growl rolled like distant thunder. Cole studied the man's steady stare and saw something behind it. Not malice, but protocol. He'd seen men like Briggs before, good soldiers serving bad maps. "Then you'll see everything," Cole said. "But so will everyone else." Before Briggs could respond, Cole turned and walked inside. He reached the main console, opened the live communications network Jonah had once used for field broadcasts, and switched it on. A small red icon blinked. Live. Public link engaged. The camera came alive, its lens reflecting the light of the living tree. Briggs and his team appeared on the screen's edge, their confusion plain. "You're being streamed to the entire country," Cole said evenly. "No closed doors here. Transparency's safer for everyone." The agents hesitated. One muttered, "Sir, press." Briggs exhaled through his nose, then gestured for his team to proceed. The inspection began. They scanned every level: the water filtration chamber, the solar canopy, the energy core. Each reading came back clean. No radiation, no hazardous waste, no emissions. Just harmony between wood, light, and circuit. The data appeared live on millions of screens across the nation. When Briggs reached the central elevator, he stopped. The camera caught his expression: surprise, then something like reverence. "You're telling me this entire structure runs itself?" he asked. "It doesn't run itself," Cole said. "It cooperates." From the corner of the frame, Ember lay watching him, calm and alert. The broadcast spread like wildfire. Within hours, hashtags flooded social media: #Tree of Light, #Guardians of Hope, #Veteran of Blue Ridge. Teachers showed the stream to students. News anchors spoke of the man who brought the mountain to life. But while the country watched with wonder, Charlotte's skyline pulsed with fury. In Helix Den's glass tower, Evelyn Reed stood before a wall of live feeds, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. Her reflection fractured across the glass like a constellation of control. "Pull him offline," she said to her assistant. "We can't," the young man stammered. "He's on open public relay. The servers are mirrored across government archives." Evelyn's calm broke for the first time. Her voice sharpened like broken glass. "Then drown him. Feed every outlet a new narrative. Make him a fanatic, a man with delusions of grandeur. We'll bury him under our version of truth." Back in Blue Ridge, Cole's phone vibrated with hundreds of messages. Some from scientists, some from strangers thanking him, some from trolls echoing Helix Den's lies. He read none of them. Instead, he walked outside into the dusk. The air smelled of pine and static, the quiet that follows revelation. Ember trotted beside him, brushing his leg, lightly. The valley below glowed faintly with campfires. Townsfolk had gathered to hold candlelight vigils. They called it the Night of the Amber Glow. Cole watched from the ridge, humbled, exhausted, but certain. He'd lived his whole life trying to find peace and solitude, yet the world had found him anyway, and maybe that was the point. He placed a hand on Ember's head and whispered, "They see us now. That's all Jonah ever wanted." The dog turned her gaze upward. The canopy answered with a soft pulse, light spreading through the veins of the oak like blood through a living heart. From a satellite's eye high above the Carolinas, that light drew a circle of gold against the black, faint but persistent, a wound healed into a scar of hope. And in homes across America, people who had forgotten what wonder felt like leaned closer to their screens and believed, for the first time in a long while, that light still belonged to everyone. Autumn returned to Blue Ridge like a soft verdict. Amber laid gently upon every ridge and hollow, the air thin and clean as a hymn you can hum without thinking. A year had passed since the night of the mountain spoke in light, and the country leaned in to listen. The headlines had flared and cooled. The lawsuits had rattled and fallen quiet. The noise had thinned until only work remained, the true music of change. Cole Mercer woke before dawn, brewed coffee that tasted like patience, and stood with Ember on the observation deck grown into the upper boughs of the white oak. The town below was a constellation stitched by roads, and farther off Asheville glimmered like a river of glass. What shone there was not coal or gas or the usual bargains. The grids had begun to drink from new wells, hybrid cells seeded by Jonah's design, scaled and stewarded by hands that had learned to move gently. Ember leaned against his leg. The gray at her muzzle had deepened into silver. She moved slower now, but her eyes were still the old bright coin of loyalty. Cole scratched behind her ear and felt that familiar click in his chest, as if something long rusted had kept opening and opening until it remembered its first shape. The official words had come in spring. The U.S. Office of Environmental Innovation, leaning on the testimony of universities and independent engineers, declared Jonah Raines's work a public scientific heritage. The ruling read like an oath: no private patent, no corporate custody, no extraction without education. Its fruits would live in the commons or not at all. The same week, a second paper slid across a table in a county building under fluorescent lights. The charter for the Ridge Commons Foundation, signed by a veteran with calloused hands, a mayor with a practical heart, a scientist who braided ethics into her lab notes, and a journalist who had turned skepticism into guardianship. They had made a small office in town smell like cedar and coffee and purpose. They had started calling each other by first names even when the room was crowded. More important than documents were the places the work went. The first pilot stood on red earth where the Navajo wind sings, a school whose taps had run rust brown for years. The day the Elysium unit exhaled its first clear stream, children cupped their hands and laughed the way people laugh when they realize the world can still surprise them. The second pocket of light blew in on a storm, a flood town in Mississippi, houses still wearing the watermark of a bad night. Ridge Commons delivered 3 seed shelters, little living ribs that woke under sunlight and began to power refrigerators full of insulin and a church basement full of cots. The third took root in the Appalachians themselves, a clinic where the road was a suggestion and winter forgot manners. They installed a canopy of biophotonic leaves. The lights in the exam room no longer hummed with doubt, and the vaccine fridge never blinked. Cole visited each site with Ember riding shotgun, paws braced on the dash when the road bucked. He did not give speeches. He carried crates, tightened fittings, showed local hands how to read the slow dials. At night, he slept on floors that smelled like bleach and hope, wakened to the sound of water being poured into a clean glass somewhere 3 rooms away. The foundation learned to run itself with a kindness that felt like math. Tom Hensley, the mayor who had once looked at the ridge with municipal suspicion, became the logistics director who could make a truck appear anywhere at dawn with spare parts and sandwiches. Grace Latham, the journalist who had come to question, stayed to document. Her films were quiet and patient, full of hands and boots and laughter muffled by masks, and she titled them like prayers. Things that keep the lights on, water without permission, a house that breathes. The Foundation's research wing gathered under Dr. Lillian Cho, a biologist in her late 30s with neat hair and eyes that missed nothing. Lillian had left a tenure track to stand where science and service make eye contact. She taught high schoolers to build leaf cells from kits and retired roofers to splice biopolymer ribs with their own steady hands. In staff meetings, she spoke softly, drew diagrams that looked like vines, and made the room feel like a lab that belonged to everyone. She was small and tireless, and when a prototype failed, she smiled, wrote the failure down, and called it tuition. Helix Dine, chastened by investigations and a stock price that lifted then sank like a bird with a broken feather, cut whole floors of middle management and pivoted to public partnerships, which meant knocking quietly and offering grant money with fewer strings than usual. Evelyn Reed survived the storm, with a title demoted and a smile that learned to show its teeth less. Once, she sent a letter to Ridge Commons, the language polished until it squeaked, proposing collaboration on a demonstration site. Tom read it, poured coffee, and set it aside. Cole never replied. The mountain was generous, but it did not forget. By midsummer, buses heavy with students and teachers began visiting the Oak, field trips filled with quiet step-taking and loud questions. Ridge Commons built wooden walkways that touched the tree without touching too much, posted signs with Jonah's handwriting etched into metal. If life can rebuild itself, so can we. They kept the inner stair restricted because power without context breeds new kinds of harm. But they made a teaching chamber in the lower roots where water moved in glass mouths and leaf panels turned slowly like they were listening to the children. On a warm Tuesday, a boy with a camouflage cap raised his hand and asked Cole if the tree was magic. Cole knelt so their eyes were level. "No," he said, smiling a little, "it's just patient. We forgot how to be." That night, after the buses and questions and granola, bar wrappers, Cole and Lillian stood by the basin while Ember dozed with her chin on her paws. Lillian, whose voice always sounded like the second cup of tea, warmer, easier, said, "He knew you'd be good at this." Cole shrugged. "I'm good at lifting things and not breaking them." "Exactly," she said. "That's the job." Fall returned. The oak learned another year of names. It wore them like rings under its bark. Work continued with that funny rhythm only work knows. Grant reports, school tours, parts delays, sudden breakthroughs that felt like jokes the universe told when it was in a good mood. Volunteers came because kindness is contagious if you don't ask it to wear a badge. Veterans found ways to stand in rooms together without looking for exits. People brought casseroles as if infrastructure runs on starch and love. On the anniversary of the broadcast, the night strangers watched a man refuse to sell another man's light. The town gathered under the oak with paper lanterns and thermoses that steamed into the cold. Dr. Laura Price drove up from Chapel Hill with graduate students and a grin that erased 20 years. Tom arranged generators that never turned on because none were needed. Grace set up a canvas screen against the trunk and projected home videos of babies laughing at clean water. Lillian placed a hand on the bark and whispered "thank you" in a language the tree didn't need. And Ember circled twice and lay down where she could see everyone at once. When it was time to speak, Cole didn't stand on a box or clear his throat. He put a hand on the railing and looked out at the faces, lined and smooth, suspicious and shining, the geometry of a town trying to become more itself. "I don't have much," he said, "besides a pair of hands that can carry heavy things and put them down gently. Jonah gave us something that refused ownership, and sometimes that's the hardest kind of gift, to keep it in the middle where it belongs." He gestured toward the children chasing each other with lanterns that bobbed like low moons. "I think the point is this: light doesn't care who you are. It just asks what you'll do while it's yours to hold." He didn't plan the last line. It rose like breath. "We'll keep holding it together." Laughter, applause, the shiver of cold and relief you get when a room agrees without voting. Then silence again, the good kind, the kind that means the words landed and can be planted and will be watered. Later, when most of the town had drifted downhill and the screen showed only moths visiting themselves, Cole climbed the final ramp to the observation deck. Ember climbed slower, and he matched her pace. That was the bargain age makes with love. Asheville lay below like a patient galaxy, each neighborhood a small promise kept. If he squinted, he could find the new community greenhouse where tomatoes fattened under leaves that hummed, and the hospital wing that had finally retired its backup diesel. Wind brought smells of wood smoke and rain and the clean ozone of systems working as designed. He'd be proud, Cole said to the valley, to the city, to the dog, to the part of himself that had survived by being stubborn and now survived by being soft. Ember nudged his hand with her head. He laughed quietly. Okay. He'd be proud of you most. The oak answered in its old language, pulses sliding through the living ribs, a slow golden tide up the trunk and out along the spread of branches until the whole crown wore a halo. The light wasn't loud. It never had been. It was the steady sort, the kind that lights a room just enough for work, the kind that waits on porches, the kind you notice most when it's gone and promise not to take for granted when it returns. Cole closed his eyes and saw a desert, a field lab, a man with kind hands and stubborn ethics, a letter written under a lamp, a key carved from two materials that refused to be enemies. He saw a dog looking at him like he was still worth guarding. He opened his eyes and found what he saw matched what was there. Somewhere beyond the ridge, a freight train pulled the night along behind it. Somewhere in town, a faucet ran in a kitchen where it hadn't run safe for 40 years. Somewhere in a city far away, a child looked up from homework under a lamp that hummed and did not poison the air. All of it ordinary, all of it holy. Cole rested his hand on the rail until the cold bit through his palm. Then he and Ember turned back toward the stair, leaving the deck to the wind and the slow arithmetic of stars. On the way down, he paused at the teaching chamber. The basin whispered. A leaf panel shifted with a sound like a page turning. He thought of Jonah, and instead of grief, gratitude moved through him, heavy, clean, a weight a man is lucky to carry. "We've got it," he said into the wood and water. "We'll keep it." The oak did not answer. It didn't need to. The light held, and that was answer enough. In the quiet, after the story ends, when the last leaf settles and the light inside the old oak fades, there is something left. A whisper that feels like prayer. Maybe the real miracle was never in the circuits or the science, but in the way people came together, believing that goodness could still grow. Like the tree, faith asks for patience. Roots before branches, silence before song. And perhaps that's how God works too, not always with thunder or fire, but in the steady glow that lives in ordinary hands, fixing, healing, carrying light from one soul to another. If this story touched you, pause for a moment. Think of the small lights in your own life. A kind word, a loyal friend, a faithful animal waiting at your door. Those are God's fingerprints. Share this story if you felt that warmth. Leave a comment about a moment when you witnessed grace in your own life, even the quiet kind. And if you'd like more stories that remind us of hope, of the unseen miracles around us every day, please subscribe to the channel. May the Lord bless every heart that still believes in light, and may His grace guide you through every shadow you face. Amen.